The Winnipeg Jets have an old new coach, or should I say a new old coach in Rick Bowness. He is there, and they have 2 picks in the first round. Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets is with us to talk about what should be an eventful couple of weeks for the Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. Gil Martin, glad to be with you today as I am every Monday. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And right now, it's my pleasure to welcome to the show for the first time the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. Harrison, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Big couple of weeks here for the Jets. They hire Rick Bowness to be their new head coach. Your thoughts about Bowness returning to Winnipeg and what that means for this team trying to get back to the playoffs after missing for the first time in 4 or 5 years?
I'll be honest. I think my feelings over the past couple of weeks have been a little bit mixed. Of course, the Bowness signing kind of leaked a couple of days ago, so I've had some time to process it. And I think the general reaction that I have is actually pretty similar across the fan base, which is a rarity. Usually Jets fans are like yelling at me or something. So it's pretty rare that they kind of feel the same way. But I think most of it is just sort of a mixture of resignation and disappointment. I think with Bowness, it's kind of a tricky one because I think he'll probably be a better coach than some of the managers that we've had in the past, and I think certainly he has a lot of defensive organization and experience. I think that he's got familiarity with the organization, at least. Probably nothing too recent, but the city of Winnipeg itself, he's got a strong connection to. So in a lot of ways, I can see why they opted for him. And I think that his personality and the way that he works in the locker room might have been one of the reasons that they were really inclined to sign him, because everything that we've heard about the Jets locker room is pretty bad. So, it sounds like it's pretty toxic. People aren't happy. And when you're losing a lot of games, people kind of hate working at the same place. So, I think it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. The main thing that I think he wants to do is have us become a tough team to play against, which is, I don't mind that. But usually, one of the things that it kind of comes at the expense of is like offensive production and stuff. So as long as you can kind of let the kids grow and blossom and not inhibit some of that stuff, I'm just kind of like ambivalent about it. It's fine. It's not really what I expected. His name came up really late, I would say, in the search, but it could be worse is probably how I would think of it.
I mean, it's not the sexiest pick, for lack of a better way to put it. It's not the headline grabbing, wow, kind of a pick, but he has a proven track record.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people will look at is, he made the Stanley Cup Finals recently. He managed to get pretty decently far with a couple of teams. And when you look at his coaching record, it's kind of a weird one because, there were some bad years with Ottawa and New York, but, some of that, it sounds like it wasn't really his fault. There were a lot of conditions back then that probably didn't help him a lot. So, going off of his Stars record, there's more there to go with. And it seems like it's pretty all right. I mean, the Jets, let's be real, the Jets haven't exactly had amazing coaches over the past couple of years. They've all done their best and tried really hard, but, sometimes it's just not really good enough, and this team evidently needs something more to push them over the edge. I don't think Bowness is the kind of guy that's going to be able to take this team and necessarily put them into a really good playoff spot. But I think at this point, it might be more about, a cultural change, trying to get the team stabilized and get it back on track. And curiously, his deal is only for 2 years. So my guess is they're trying to think about a shorter term tenure here. I think Rick might have been one of the only guys who would be willing to do that. Most of the other coaches, whether it's Tocchet or somebody else, probably wanted more job security, which I understand. I think that this approach, if that's what they want to do, I think that's an acceptable read on it, uh, and maybe even the preferable option here, because every time they have to fire somebody, they always eat a ton of money. So um, this time, the contract is not that expensive. It's within reason for term. And like the best case scenario is the Jets stop sucking and actually look happy to be at work. But I don't know that I have a lot of expectations, but we'll just kind of see what Rick does. I just think the biggest thing that I want to see is like the guys happy and playing to their level of capable talent and stuff. I think that that's something that we haven't seen from a lot of them, and like I'm tired of just seeing Hellebuck being one of the few guys that shows up every day, and he's constantly getting shelled. And a lot of the guys, the body language, their interviews, they were just kind of pissed, and I can understand why. I think that the lack of progress over the years has definitely put the team in a bad position with a lot of the guys. And Winnipeg being the city that it is, I know that some folks always say it's hard to attract talent, and that is true. I think that that's something that anyone would readily admit. So if that's the case, you got to make them happy somehow.
How does this team improve their defense? I mean, that was obviously the biggest shortcoming over the course of this past season, other than maybe team chemistry. Bowness has some experience in that area, but what do you think the management is going to do to shore up the defense a little bit?
Honestly, I don't know that there's anything that they really can do other than just relying on the kids more. I think guys like Brendan Dillon will probably be moved because there's a bit of a redundancy on the left side. We have a lot of left-handed defenders. The right side's a really big weak spot. And Neil Pionk really had a tough year last season. He said himself that he felt embarrassed by his performance, and I was like, okay, let's slow down. You had a bad year, I understand that I think he always takes his performances really personally. So I think last year was super frustrating. But, given the cap situation that the Jets have, and the fact that there's just not a ton of really good defenders out there that are going to be cheap, Winnipeg never likes spending a lot, so I can't really see them getting super spendy and flashy unless if they trade Dubois and somehow like a defender comes back, I could see that being one of the few ways. But mostly I think it's going to be internal. I think Ville Heinola needs more minutes. Dylan Sandberg is looking to be primed for some kind of like a top 4 role. And if they do that, I think that they're not going to be good. I think that they're still going to be rough, certainly in defensive coverages and stuff. But I mean, they just don't have a lot of room to make a ton of really big moves. And sometimes I think with the Jets, it's a little bit of an okay thing because every time they make a big splash, it usually scares me.
Sometimes those big moves backfire. Yeah, no question about that. Draft coming up, 2 first-round picks. What positions do you think they'll emphasize, or is it just going to be best player available?
They've usually gone with BPA unless their scouts have pushed for somebody in particular. I think they're really excited to maybe add like a right-handed D somewhere or a center. It's probably going to be, whatever falls to them, best player available. Partly because, this draft is just super weird anyways, so I don't think they really know what's going to be available at their picks. And with the stuff that's happening in Russia, which might make it difficult for prospects like that to come over, I think it could really screw with a lot of the rankings because this first round did actually have a number of really talented forwards that they might have picked up. But, they're concerned probably about whether guys can come over or not. And I think, the situation with a lot of the prospects all kind of having the COVID impacted seasons catching up, it's just creating like a perfect storm of uncertainty. So I'm going to say BPA for now, unless they really surprise me. But I don't know. The situation is super weird around this year's draft. And try as I might, I just really have no idea what anyone is thinking.
You're not alone in that, Harrison. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco, and you can find our podcast Twitter at LO_Winnipeg Jets. You can find Locked On Jets, same place that you find Locked On NHL, Odyssey, YouTube, Spotify, Megaphone, all the fun stuff. We've got audio and video versions of the podcast available, and we just really appreciate your support.
All right, Harrison, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball, and you got NBA futures, NFL futures, all kinds of things going on. NHL Draft coming up. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, tennis, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.